sponsoring a few SPACs, but you could sponsor almost anything if you wanted to. Why did you pick Joby?
So Joby has the amazement of, a little bit like your earlier thing, of the Jetsons now become real, of moving urban transport from 2D to 3D. It's Uber meets Tesla in the air. And that can transform space, people's commutes, stop gridlock, and have that not have the climate impact. And to do all of these things in a way that make cities healthier and more fun and more ability to get around. And so that kind of redefinition of transport, of networks, has been one of the things that I've actually been doing over the last 5 to 7 years. And so while I originally hadn't thought about the third dimension of space, I did actually, once I saw it, said, oh, this is a new network. And networks are how we transform our work, our experiences. And so this, networks, I understand.
So we've all imagined that Jetsonian future when we're stuck in traffic or we have a long trip ahead of us, but we're not quite there yet. And I wonder, is this realistic for 1 billion people? Like, how does this scale? Does it really reinvent transportation or just augment transportation?
Well, I think reinvention is in part also augmentation. You'll, of course, still have ground cars. You'll be moving heavy things around. There'll probably even be, various forms on the passenger side. But the reinvention means that what previously was configured by geography, think about, the flight to the airport, or or the drive to the airport, or think about, kind of getting around things. Now, it's just literally the 3D of potentially getting there. And that, emphasizing people and the fact that moving people around is really key. So I think that kind of reinvention, is the same kind of reinvention that when we start doing plane travel, of reinventing space, that all of a sudden now, across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, isn't so far away. The fact that you could live a little further out and kind of make that work. Like, all of those things are the kinds of reinvention. Then, of course, the climate change and because of the sharing model, the accessibility to everybody as part of it, as Paul was talking about.
So let's talk about that. The Uber plus Tesla in the air metaphor is so vivid. Is the pilot a Joby employee? Is it a contractor like an Uber driver is? And is that really the best labor model at this point? It's a company that's still not profitable.
Well, we have to actually get the service going. Joby is the first to have a G1 paper with the FAA. And the only eVTOL to have a G1 paper agreed on how certification will work. It's flown a prototype vehicle over 150 miles, over 1,000 test flights. So it's real. You can see it actually, in fact, flying. It's not a design. It actually has a pilot doing it. And so I think one of the things that will, I think we start with having a pilot in the vehicle, even before like autonomous vehicles, to maximize safety and understood and learn from it, because a combination of, obviously, it's safety, 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 and then ease and kind of a good impact. So I think the labor market will be fine. One of the things that Joby did is they actually figured out a fixed wing a certification. So it's a broad range of pilots who've been trained, who only need a little bit of an additional cert in order to be able to fly them.
So, you're also sponsoring a SPAC for Aurora, the self-driving car company. Between air taxis and self-driving cars and point-to-point space travel, which we've seen some progress in with Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin of late, what's your vision of how all of these different kinds of transportation fit together, let's say 10, 20 years, or I don't know, 50 years from now?
Well, it's kind of funny because I've kind of found myself just by thinking about networks, kind of doing all of this reinvention of transportation. And obviously, autonomous vehicles will be key for increasing safety, decreasing costs, making the network as a platform for all of this. Aurora is obviously, led the Series A for Greylock. And Chris Urmson, who I sometimes refer to as the Henry Ford of autonomous vehicles, was the technical lead for building Waymo, and this is kind of the rebuild of it. And I think that what we're learning is that the central networks in human life, right? Obviously, we have the internet, but also transport are key to people's lives, to commerce. And so, what are the reinventions that then enable all of this new productivity on top of it? And so autonomous vehicles, both the kind of passenger, but also trucks for shipping when it gets to Aurora, all of these things are things that we have line of sight. We can see them. Like they're in Aurora, it's down the road. In Joby, it's in the air. But we can see that invention happening. It's just a question of getting there.
Do you see no pilots someday or autonomous taxis, or is that just not in the viewfinder yet?
I think it's in the viewfinder, but it's with a safety first. It's in the viewfinder past doing it with the pilots. I mean, well, look, we already have autonomous, like most of the commercial planes are flying on autopilot. The great portion of the time they're in air. There's already a ton of that, but you want to make sure you've got it all right. You want to make sure, like, pilots are smart and are learners. You want to make sure that we've got it all 100% right before you do autonomous vehicles, which is the reason why Joby starts with a pilot. But it's definitely in the screen of the view ahead.
Meantime, Reid, the Senate just passed this $1 trillion infrastructure bill. For Joby to succeed, you need these vertiports across the country where they can take off and land vertically. Some folks in the self-driving community don't think that this infrastructure bill does enough to work towards their ambitions. Do you think the bill does enough to address the future of transportation as you see it?
Well, I'm always we should be accelerating more and more towards the future. So there's a lot of great things. It's a big, complicated bill. There's a lot of great things in it. The recognition that electrification is going to be so key and central to future of air, future of road, all of the infrastructure, and doing that is really key. So there's a bunch of very good things in the bill. Would you say, asking me as a technologist, saying technology is inventing the future? It's part of how we make American inventions, like Joby and Aurora, and that we bring this technology to our own benefit and to the world. Obviously, I think we should be doing more. We should be thinking on each of our major problems within transport and generally, like, how can we make technology move faster, deliver better on this, and how do we create the incentives for the market to so do it? Because that's obviously where the future will be, and part of the future and health of American industry is by getting there with robust technology earliest.
Meantime, COVID isn't going away anytime soon. We've seen companies open up, go back into lockdown. You and I have talked about how fundraising has changed. You've funded over the last 18 months some entrepreneurs you've never met in person, which would have been unheard of before. How much of that is still happening now, and how much of that behavior do you think continues even in a post-pandemic world, given what you've learned?
So I think, part of it is these false dichotomies. I think we're both going to continue a lot of the kind of virtual world of work. We can do events, we can do meetings and so forth through these kind of virtual environments. And I think that's now a robust part of the market. It'll affect parts of the industry and education, telemedicine, et cetera, et cetera. I think that was all persistent and here to stay. On the other hand, there's a real value to being in the office together, to building those relationships of trust, to collaborating, to innovation, to brainstorming. And so I think people want to come back. And I think it's what the new blend is going to look like. So it's going to really be both in terms of how it operates. And that will be true in my investing business as well. I think I'll meet more entrepreneurs, in various time zones and geographies, because now we can do it in various ways. But probably when we get to a big deal or an important deal, or we're working to, at Greylock to help build the company, it'll still be important to do it in person. And which investor will an entrepreneur want to go with will probably be the person they have trust with. And part of what we still establish trust is, we had that dinner where we talked about it in depth. And so I think people are really raring to get back to that. Now, obviously, we have to be smart in, not just the Delta variant, but what other future variants will be. And we have to be smart about testing. And hopefully everyone will learn actually getting vaccinated is a good thing. It's part of the science of how we all get through this together. It isn't just your own health, it's our collective health. And so, that's obviously still a lot of uncertainty and still a lot of navigation where we're going in the coming months.
You're also having companies choose to be remote first and remote only. Do you think it's harder to blitzscale remotely? I know you're always focused on speaking to masters of scale. Are they giving something up? Are there some potential disadvantages to achieving that kind of hyper growth that you're looking for in an early stage company?
Well, so I think we haven't yet seen a company completely distributed blitzscale in the real definition of blitzscaling. And part of the reason for that is that there's so much chaos. The very first counterintuitive rule of blitzscaling is embrace chaos. And in order to do that, you have to have relationships of trust, and you have to be able to, oh, you didn't tell me about that. Oh, that was kind of irritating, et cetera. But you have the relationship and the culture to carry you through it. And so that strong and binds of trust and alliance and communication, like water cooler and so forth, is really important to heretofore what we've learned about blitzscaling. Now, that being said, if everyone had to be all remote, then there's definitely its relative speed with blitzscaling, and people could do that in an effective way. But I actually think that what you'll see in blitzscaling companies is they will, generally speaking, they'll have remote offices, remote people, remote work, but they will want to have some very core, like, especially the early days, teams working together, because that's a pattern that we understand how to make work and how to, double the size of your employee base, in a month or 3 months, and actually, in fact, make that work, which, we're still figuring out how that works on, Teams and Zoom and these kinds of environments.
Right. So what's your advice to entrepreneurs and CEOs right now, given that it seems like the playbook has almost been written up? They have a chance to ripped up. They have a chance to rewrite the rules. What are you telling your companies right now?
Well, not to overly generalize on the fact that we spent the last 18 months, kind of at a remote and using all these terms, to figure that actually, in fact, people will want to get back in the office. Matter of fact, it may have been with you that I first kind of started borrowing that Hamilton phrase of being in the room where it happens, which I think is still a very kind of human instinct for these kinds of things. And so don't overly generalize from the last 3 months, and don't overly generalize from the fact that, employees who are may have gotten very comfortable with the working at home arrangements. So, well, that's what I want to keep going. We're in a dynamic times. Things are changing. So experiment and get a sense of it. Don't overly mandate, experiment with A, experiment with B, make that happen. And that's because we're in, we haven't in any time in modern history come out of a shutdown and a lot of remote working and a pandemic and the uncertainties that come from that. And so you have to approach it with a learning and iteration mindset.